Hey guys, Hustler here making my first theory video on my Spin Beast video series, how to play spins for a living. In this video, I'll be focusing on how to play the button optimally versus both the small blind and the big blind. But let's start by going through the basics. The button three-handed VPIP basics. The button three-handed is the only position in spins where we're never forced to put in a blind. So what this means is that we could, in theory, play as tight of a range as we wanted to. Since we could, in theory, have, I don't know, like a 1% VPIP on the button or something, and only open aces and kings, and still be plus EV from the button. But even though this will be plus EV to do, this will be a terrible strategy to use. Because the button is the only position where we're always guaranteed to be in position both pre-flop and post-flop. And having position is a very powerful weapon to have. Having position is actually the most powerful weapon to have in poker. So as a result, we rely on the button to make most of our chips while we're three-handed. So we definitely don't want to waste our opportunity here to make a lot of chips by not playing an optimal amount of hands from the spot. As a result, it's key that when we're constructing our button ranges, to construct it in a way that's going to maximize our expected value. It's not enough for your button strategy to be plus EV. Your button strategy needs to be max EV. So even if through your calculations you determine that playing certain hands might be pretty close between break even or profitable, we still want to force ourselves to play these hands because it's our job. When we're on the button, we must be the punisher by applying the max amount of pressure to the blinds as possible while we have the advantage of being in position. Playing as wide of a range as you possibly can while you're in position not only gives you an opportunity to make more chips long term, playing close hands, it also allows you to make more chips when you play your value hands as well. Since if your opponents notice, if you're playing too tight of a range, they're going to play back at you less often, both pre-flop and post-flop. But with that said, we do need to be careful not to make our button opening range too wide and overestimate how much equity that we're going to be able to realize post-flop playing certain hands, which as a result will cause us to lose a lot of chips overall. Finding this perfect balance is key to having optimal results. And later in this video, I will explain to you how to calculate this threshold and construct optimal pre-flop ranges. But first, let's quickly discuss limping. The basics when limping the button. When we limp, one, we will not be given the initiative. Having the initiative is another very powerful weapon to have. Having the initiative increases your edge both pre-flop and post-flop and allows you to win more pots, especially with weak hands. When we limp, we give ourselves zero opportunity to win the pot pre-flop. We also give the big blind an opportunity to try and realize his or her equity for free or 100% of his or her hands, even their complete trash hands like 7 deuce offsuit. We also give the small blind incredible 6-to-1 pot odds to complete. So as a result, we're going to be forced to play much more hands three-handed instead of two-handed. This forces our hands to have much less post-flop equity on top of the fact that they're already without initiative, making it much harder for us to realize as much of our equity post-flop compared to if we just raise pre-flop. I personally almost never fold my small blind when the button limps, unless effective stacks are very short or I have good reads that the big blind is raising limps with an extremely wide range. Limping is fine when one, effective stacks are shorter, or in certain situations versus certain players, depending on reads, of course. But I feel that limping overall when deep, and when I say deep, I mean 17 effective stacks and over, is not nearly as effective as raising versus the population. And when I say raising, I mean min raising. There is no reason to raise more than this in spins unless you're going all in pre-flop. Okay, now that we've established that we should be raising an adequate amount from the button, especially when we're deep, how do we calculate what hands are plus EV to raise? First, let me start off by saying calculating population tendencies is very important to me when I'm constructing my relist ranges, because knowing what the population tendencies are gives me a general idea of how the average player plays in different situations. I only wish that PT4 would make it easier to check population frequencies and spins, but whatever, moving on. Thus, helping me to construct the threshold for my ranges. This allows me to do my best to play optimally while readless before I have an opportunity to adjust accordingly. Analyzing your database will not only help you to better exploit the population, it's going to help you to better exploit regs as well. Here are the population tendencies versus me. But please note that these numbers are going to vary from player to player based on many different factors. Villain adjustments to your PFR range, buy-in level, sample size, game selection, etc. Also, not adjusting your ranges once you develop reads is a huge leak. You should basically always be looking to exploit specific leaks and adjust your readless ranges as your sample size versus a certain player builds. Doing this will maximize your EV long term. I'll now show you guys how I construct my PFR range. Since the population is obviously defending way more than the 43% minimum defense frequency needed in order to prevent me from auto-profiting pre-flop by min-raising any two cards, in order for me to show a profit when I raise the button, I must realize some of my pot equity post-flop. Pot equity is the amount of times in which one hand should beat another hand. For example, if we had 7 deuce off and we played versus ace king off, 7 deuce off should win 32% of the time since 7 deuce off has 32% pot equity versus ace king off, in a vacuum at least. But poker is not played in a vacuum. So depending on many different factors, you will be able to realize more or less of your equity post-flop playing many hands. Factors such as skill advantages, range versus range advantages, position, initiative, etc. So in order to calculate how much equity in which you need to realize post-flop in order to make raising the bottom 15% of hands better than folding, do the following.